Celebrating 44 years on the air, Farm Week is a production of Mississippi State University Extension.
Today on Farm Week, full steam ahead. USMCA countries partner on a new railway. Plus, senators on both sides of the aisle collaborate on a bill designed to give cattle producers more of the retail dollar. In Southern gardening, they call it Salvia, the perfect and one of the most colorful bedding plants. And in our feature, the rest of the story behind those ag losses in the Lone Star State. Farm Week starts right now. Hello everybody, I'm Mike Russell. Thanks for joining us today on Farm Week, and we wish you a happy Easter. Just under a year ago, the USMCA went into effect, strengthening trade between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. Of course, the pandemic had a huge negative impact, but last week, a rail merger was proposed that could connect the three partners in a major way. Jonah Holland has more.
The Canadian Pacific Railroad proposed a $25 billion merger with the Kansas City Southern Railroad. The merger would complete a route system servicing all three USMCA countries. The rail agreement would simplify the movement of cargo from Canada to Mexico, reducing inspection and paperwork requirements. Infrastructure in the deal will create an end-to-end merger as the two systems only intersect in Kansas City. For U.S. row crop producers, the combined railroad will simplify shipping for Midwestern grain to reach ports along the Gulf Coast. The rail partnership would be the fifth largest of the 6 U.S. Class I railroads, servicing around 20,000 miles of track. The two companies earned more than $8 billion in 2020. The merger comes during a post-COVID supply chain recovery. Railroads, like so many parts of the economy, have had to cope with a shifting consumer demand, changes that have disrupted production and distribution systems. Reporting for Farm Week, I'm Jonah Holland.
The issue of race discrimination in agriculture has been debated for decades and continued again as the Secretary of Agriculture was called into the House Ag Committee to discuss the topic. John Torpy has that story.
Let me be clear. There is no place at the USDA for discrimination, none, nor for that matter, anywhere. This historic moment to advance equity must not be lost, and I intend to do everything I can to ensure that it isn't.
With those opening remarks, USDA Secretary Tom Vilsack laid out his plan for addressing decades-old claims of discrimination by the United States Department of Agriculture as he appeared before the House Agriculture Committee.
We all are very pleased to have the opportunity today to examine this topic, which is deeply embedded in each of our hearts, both Democrats and Republicans, care about the plight of our Black farmers.
The virtual hearing was held to learn how the Biden administration will use $4 billion allocated from the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. As part of the $1.9 trillion coronavirus relief package, these funds were set aside to relieve some of the debt being experienced by socially disadvantaged farmers and farmers of color. One of the motivations behind the infusion of cash is to help to level the playing field for a shrinking number of Black farmers. According to USDA's 2017 Census of Agriculture, only 1.4% of all farmers in the U.S. are Black.
Black farmers don't trust the United States Department of Agriculture, which has really hurt us in participation, and it's because of all the discrimination that I and others have faced.
Dr. John Boyd, president of the National Black Farmers Association, has been speaking out about inequality and racism by USDA employees since before the landmark Pigford versus Glickman discrimination case was decided in the late 1990s. Despite the settlement, accusations of discrimination continue to be leveled at the department.
But at the end of the day, this whole purpose is to try to get this done as quickly as possible, as effectively as possible, and to provide farmers enough information and outreach so they can make informed decisions about their direct loan and the tax implications, and we can settle up their guaranteed loan without any further disruption.
An additional $1 billion has been set aside to create a racial equity commission that will address long-standing discrimination across USDA.
Another ongoing debate, the disparity in retail dollars between cattle producers and meat packers. A new bill would require packers to buy half of their beef on the open market. It was co-sponsored by Senator Charles Grassley, who says new aid for producers just isn't enough.
This assistance is merely a Band-Aid covering a gaping wound. Congress must step up again and instead of providing payments to producers, make sure that producers have access to fair and transparent markets. Today, on behalf of Iowa's independent cattle producers, I'm proud to reintroduce my bill with Senator Tester to mandate negotiated cash trade at 50%. Without a mandated amount of cash trade, producers continue to be residual suppliers and will lack leverage to fairly negotiate with packing companies. Cattle producers are counting on us to make changes. We can no longer take a wait-and-see approach. The beef industry employs hundreds of thousands of hardworking men and women who work each day to help feed our country and the world. But the USDA agricultural census shows we are losing these producers.
And speaking of new aid, sign up for the new PAP program, Pandemic Assistance for Producers, starts on April 5th. It's a multi-billion-dollar USDA initiative that expands current programs and adds new ones. New Ag Secretary Tom Vilsack says it will provide broad support.
There'll be additional resources for protective equipment for farm workers and processors who work at processing facilities. There's an opportunity for even seafood processors to be engaged and involved in this. So it's very comprehensive. We're going to take a look at the resiliency of our food supply system and figure out ways in which we might be able to provide greater resilience. That might be helping processing facilities. It might be looking at ways in which we can expand processing capacity.
And in Southern gardening today, as we edge deeper into spring, Gary Bachman says there's almost no better way to get your color on than by planting a popular bedding plant called Salvia. Here's Gary.
If you like beautiful and reliable flowering plants in your summer garden, then take a look at Salvia. There are both annual and perennial varieties to choose from, so you just can't go wrong with Salvia planted in your landscape. Annual Salvia is a popular choice for many gardeners because of its bright plumes of color. The Salsa series is a good choice. Salsa Salvia has medium to dark green foliage that really shows off the numerous spikes of colorful flowers. The tubular blooms are available in scarlet, purple, and white and persist for many weeks. Salsa will grow to about 10 to 12 inches tall and wide and makes a terrific bedding plant when massed together in the landscape. Now, if you're interested in perennial varieties, here are several to consider. Mystic Spires is a compact growing plant that is tolerant to the heat and humidity we experience in our Mississippi gardens. It flowers freely, producing spikes of beautiful true blue flowers all summer long. Last summer, I grew Black and Bloom and absolutely loved this plant. These plants will eventually grow to about 36 inches tall, and they thrive in our Mississippi summer heat. Now I'm really impressed with the fluted flowers of Magenta Love and Wishes and glowing coral Ember's Wish. These salvia have a more open habit and will flower non-stop until frost in the fall. Another bonus is that both annual and perennial salvia are a surefire way to attract hummingbirds and butterflies to your summer garden. I'm horticulturist Gary Bachman, and I'll see you next time on Southern Gardening.
We'll take a break right here, but stick around. Coming up, before we get too far into hotter weather, a look at the impact of the big chill in February. In Texas, a combination of a massive freeze and a lack of power, a 1-2 punch that clobbered ag output in the state. All that made worse by the pandemic. The citrus and produce industries, even dairy, a combined impact of hundreds of millions of dollars. There's much more to the story, though, as we said earlier, and you'll see all of it coming up on Farm Week. Don't go away.
At Mississippi State University, Extension is reaching beyond the college campus and impacting adult education. We're instructing agricultural professionals on the latest trends in research and technology, inspiring communities, empowering small businesses, and promoting the growth of healthy families where youth and adults can reach their fullest potential.
The MSU Extension Service, sharing our vision for the future.
ATVs are a ton of fun for people of all ages, but these powerful machines can also be a ton of trouble if safety guidelines aren't followed. Never carry more than one person on a single rider four-wheeler. The four-wheeler can become unstable and very dangerous. ATVs are designed for off-road use only. Never drive one on a highway or any other paved surface, and always ride the right size machine at the right speed. This message brought to you by MSU Extension 4-H.
It's a simple idea. Knowledge that transforms lives shouldn't be limited to those on a campus, but extended to any and all who want or need it, wherever they are. At Mississippi State University, we've been making that possible for more than 100 years through the MSU Extension Service. What began as an effort to extend the latest research to farmers has become something much more. Today, we're helping Mississippians from all walks of life, giving them the tools they need to build a brighter future. We're sparking the imagination of students around the state and inspiring the next generation of doctors. We're helping rural communities find their way to the internet and connect to the world at large. And we're teaching families how to lead healthier lives in ways both big and small. MSU is standing firm in its commitment to that one simple idea: extend the knowledge that transforms lives wherever they are.
Time once again for the Market Report with Zach Ashmore, always on top of things. Zach?
Thanks, Mike. Markets on a downward trend this past week, at least in row crops, while livestock on the way up. Let's take a look. Last week's biggest loss, wheat again, this time dropping 12 cents. As we said last week, weather and competition a reason, but another? Well, we'll get to that in a bit. Last week's biggest gain, lumber, continuing an upward trend the past few weeks, and lean hogs, also continuing a trend that's lasted all month. Sometimes it's like 2 weeks are the same, but this time live cattle's joined in to rise about 3.5 cents. So, row crops falling these past several weeks. So many reasons we could get into. We've got competition, weather, supply, and another factor, the U.S. dollar. What effect in real terms does it have? Well, not as much as you might think. Appears traders more interested in other reasons I mentioned. A bigger influence? USDA reports. Right now, looks like markets and the government butting heads on what the real price should be. To get into the details, though, here's market analyst Ted Seifried.
Whenever we talk about the strength in the dollar, understand the dollar index is a basket against other currencies. It's not something that we look up very closely for row crops because we look at our main competitor down in South America. That's not a big part of the basket. That basket is mainly based on the yen and the euro, right? But when we talk about wheat, it is a big competitor because of, who else is selling wheat, right? It's not South America. Right. It's, Europe and Russia and Australia. So that stronger dollar does seem to have a bigger impact on U.S. exports. But whether there's a whole lot of upside potential in that dollar or not remains to be seen. I kind of don't think there is. The very interesting thing that we have in corn is that when you look at the fundamentals for corn, or at least the known fundamentals, what the USDA balance sheet says, we have a fairly ample carryover according to the USDA. They've been very reluctant to increase exports. They've been very reluctant to lower that ending stock number at a 1.5 billion bushel carryover. We don't have to price ration corn. That's a soybean story. But the market acts like we do. The spreads act like we do. The cash market acts like we do. You look at that May-July spread, that's very much saying that we have a shortage of corn up front. Now, whether that is farmers not wanting to sell cash corn here because they sold too low on the soybeans, so now they're looking to make it up on corn, or they sold some corn too cheaply, and now they're really holding on for the big summer rally that has kind of been, touted for the last few months. I don't know what it is, but we're going to see a lot more about that on the quarterly grain stocks report. Are we going to see another revision from the USDA on production from the last couple of years and saying, hey, there isn't as much corn out there, which could translate into a big revision on the USDA balance sheet? So the market's trying to tell us something here, and it doesn't really reflect the fundamentals that the USDA is giving us. So whether that's the market trying to outsmart the USDA and ultimately the market might be wrong, or whether that's the market knowing something that the USDA hasn't put on paper yet, we're going to see. And a big part or a big step forward into answering that question is going to happen on Wednesday.
Moving on to cattle and hogs. Interesting market situation these past few weeks. Hogs steadily rising while cattle down until this week. Now these two livestock commodities don't exactly play off each other, but at the same time they kind of do. It's spring, grilling season, and if China's right about its ASF recovery, things are looking up. Ted Seifert gets into the deeper details.
It had been 7, almost 8 weeks where we had just sideways trading cash, and that was getting very frustrating, especially when at one point you had April cattle trading an $11 premium to cash with the expectation that that cash was going to trade higher, but then it didn't, and then it didn't again, and then it didn't again, and it was just Groundhog Day all over again, right? And so we had to break off of our highs. But finally, the cash cattle started to find some footing, a little bit of strength, not a tremendous amount. 14s traded, 15s, we heard a little bit of 16. So that's better, right? And that allowed the cattle market to find some footing and start to come back a little bit. Even feeders were higher on Friday, despite the fact that corn was coming back, up 6 cents or so. I think there is more strength coming in the cattle. I like where we're going from here, and I like the look of the charts. Now, hogs, that chart, I've been saying for about a month that hog chart really looked a lot like the soybean chart looked like back in November. I mean, it had been a very nice, organized uptrend. And then we had to see a little bit of a break. We had to sort of fix the overbought condition of that market, and we did. And now we're kind of in a position where I think there's potential to go quite a bit higher. Domestic demand's really good, just as we're getting into the beginning of grilling season. This is sort of an interesting time for hogs. And, now you've got pretty much all the contract months trading over the par level, the 100 mark. The bulk of the strength coming in the mid to late summer, because that's really, I think, when we're expecting the domestic demand and the exports to really be competing, and that's when we might have quite a bit of exports to China.
And that's it for a deeper look into the markets. As mentioned earlier, the USDA releasing its grain stocks report this week. Next week, we'll talk about the effects and see if the market was right all along. Mike?
Thanks, Zach. Last week, we gave you a sneak peek at this story, a look at the real impact on agriculture in Texas of that deep freeze in February. Much of the country was affected, and all 254 counties in the Lone Star State. Unprecedented. Here's John Torpy with the rest of the story.
Last month, an Arctic intrusion pushed dangerously cold temperatures and winter storms across Texas. No part of the state's agricultural industry was left untouched.
We have a variety called Valencia, which is kind of a late orange, is 100% lost. They were all still on the tree.
The citrus crop for the nation's third largest food producer was either damaged or destroyed.
Just the citrus industry is estimated at $310 million. That doesn't really tell the whole story. It's kind of hard to believe where you are, but those trees were in bud and bloom for next year's crop. So not only did we lose this crop, we lost the next crop too. So basically 2 crops.
The citrus industry isn't alone. Texas A&M University Extension reports damage to the winter vegetable crop will most likely exceed $150 million. According to the Texas International Produce Association, a Rio Grande Trade Valley organization whose members grow 60 different commodities, almost every crop was destroyed, with varieties like spinach getting hit the worst.
Roughly 80 to 95% of the industry that was growing greens was decimated. And by decimated, I mean nothing. It's pockets of things that have survived. A few rows of cilantro here, maybe a field of cabbage there, but overall, it's those soft leafy greens, the things you end up seeing in salads or what we call warm or soup or boiling vegetables. All of those were just devastated.
As the 8-day cold snap that included a blizzard rampaged across the Lone Star State, millions of people were left without power. Supplies of natural gas diminished as pipelines froze and demand skyrocketed. The loss of electricity left agricultural operations like greenhouses, poultry farms, and dairies helpless against the freezing temperatures.
We didn't have natural gas to pasteurize the milk, so we poured out 14 million gallons of milk. 14 million gallons. So it just, retail price $3 a gallon. So that's over $40 million worth of milk poured down the drain.
For some dairy producers, the storm cut deeper than just sending profits down the drain.
Well, I talked to one dairyman. He had to sell every cow. Every cow had frostbite. They were just froze. They just run them. And a lot of dairymen didn't have to sell the whole herd, but they had cows that, their udders froze, and they're just, they're hamburger now.
For the last 12 months, the Texas farmer has been getting kicked in the teeth.
The winter storm's impact is only the latest in a string of setbacks for Texas producers. The recent combination of weather events are only part of the story, as farmers and ranchers are still suffering losses brought on by the economic ripple effect started by the one-year-old coronavirus pandemic.
It shut down 65% of all of their receivers, right? Restaurants were closed, schools were closed. All of a sudden, your vacation areas and resorts were closed, cruise ships were closed. So you could only send your produce to grocery stores. If you didn't have a grocery store business or grocery store customer, you had nowhere to go with that produce, so you threw it away.
The livestock sector in the nation's #1 cattle-producing state took a big hit from the winter storms as well, with Texas A&M forecasting damage to touch $228 million. Texas Farm Bureau President Russell Banning says the storms couldn't have happened at a worse time for producers.
Most of Texas was in the middle of spring calving season. We consider January and February down here springtime, and so we were kind of in the middle of that. So there was some young stock lost, and now we're just in the assessing mode and going forward and healing mode, I guess you could say.
Banning says the last cold snap he experienced in farming was 38 years ago. But the winter storms and freezing temperatures were a first for him.
For us, this was a disaster. And I know weather like this hits other parts of the country, and it's not a disaster because you're set up for it. I mean, you've dealt with it. But when you've never dealt with something like this, man, we started getting prepared 2 or 3 days ahead of time. You just can't prepare for something that you really haven't ever seen.
As if farmers didn't already have enough to contend with. Well, next week we'll take a lighter approach with one of the premier events of the year, the 2021 Dixie National Sale of Junior Champions, which happened just before that big freeze. It was year 52 of this beloved event, the grand finale for young people competing like crazy with more than 2,500 animals. You'll meet a couple of young ladies who epitomize responsibility, showmanship, and competitive spirit. The 2021 Dixie National Sale of Junior Champions, next time on Farm Week. And before we go, speaking of making the best of things, a couple of farmers in Minneapolis are enjoying the sweet taste of success. They are taking maple syrup and with a little ingenuity, enjoying a different kind of harvest early in the year.
Sometimes you have to back up. There you go. To do some forward thinking.
This is our maple property that we have. It's about 21 acres.
And among these 21 acres, you'll find 8 miles worth of pipes crisscrossing through the woods. Even though it's springtime, they're in full harvest mode.
Your only real competition out here are woodpeckers, squirrels.
Woodpeckers, squirrels, the wind from Mother Nature.
The sap that's vacuumed out of here is taken to Kevin Sathry's farm near the town of Adams. just a stone's throw from the Iowa border. Here, the name itself changes from Sathry to Saptree Maple Products.
We put it in our coffee, we put it on waffles, pancakes, cornbread, we even put it in our milk, cottage cheese.
But Kevin learned that you can make a lot more than syrup when you're hauling in 30,000 gallons of sap. Early on in the pandemic, they made hand sanitizer and donated it, though the farm is best known for another invention.
We take the syrup and we make whiskey out of it.
The real name is Miskey, an organic whiskey that Nikolai Uden helps Kevin make.
There's a lot of tools that we use that I never thought that we would be using.
Using new technology and an age-old product, Nikolai combines maple syrup, yeast, water, and nutrients in a mix tank.
This makes chemistry a lot more interesting.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. I 100% agree.
After a week, they'll check the sugar content. Then it's ready to still.
Our product needs to sit for at least 30 days. The stuff that we've been selling has usually been aged for about a year.
The Miskey is bottled in two ways. One is straight out of the barrel. The other has an extra dose of maple syrup.
I love them both, but I'm more of this kind, just a straight whiskey. I call it like a bourbon/rum.
From syrup to sanitizer to spirits, there's no telling what this farm will come up with next.
We're farmers, and you know, it's one of the oldest commodities out there is syrup. Walk through the woods became a spring harvest.
Well, nice to see somebody getting ahead. Remember, you can find past episodes of Farm Week on our website at farmweek.tv. And don't forget to follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter as well. We'll see you next week. Thanks for watching. Stay safe. Happy Easter.